that we've lost the plot. Essentially, is how do we actually go out there and make disciples? You hear guys like Francis Chan that just say, "I just want to. If we could actually just put me on an island, let me read the New Testament again, and start from scratch, would it look anything like this?" It's what we've called the Uriah effect, that we are all lined up on the front lines and we're going after, we're going to go after the enemy, and we're going to take ground for the kingdom. And we all say, and we have people who are running out there and they turn around and they find that they're in the combat zone all by themselves.
Hello everyone, Dennis Allen with the Disciple Dilemma, and today's edition, our episode, is really a conversation for leaders who aren't the pastors, because it's about the pastors and it's about the way that we treat our pastors. If we want discipleship to succeed, we've got to understand what we're doing to the people in the pulpits, the people on the staff, the people who are actually pulling the weight day in, day out. Today, our guest is Matt Davis. Matt is a former megachurch pastor who is now the president and chief pastoral officer of Pastoral Transitions, with a podcast called Life After Ministry. That's interesting all by itself. Matt spent a lot of time with a lot of pastors who've been sent out the door and dealing with the trauma of being a pastor, and there is trauma. Matt's a graduate of the Talbot School of Theology with a master's, also Biola University in Christian education. He is a certified counselor with the American Association of Christian Counselors and a Save Your Marriage Before It Starts assessment facilitator and trainer. We got a great guy talking about a great subject. What's it like to be a pastor? Here we go. Matt Davis, thank you for joining us on the Disciple Dilemma.
It's good to be here with you.
As we've talked with pastors, we have seen a lot of serious conversations, a lot of dark conversations around this is a tough job. Would you frame for us, as a coach consultant who's talked to a lot of people about this, what's it like as a pastor in the Western church today? What do you see and feel?
It's an amazing feeling, I think, for a lot of pastors who lead very public lives. You are in the fishbowl. I remember when I was a pastor for a couple of decades in a very crowded Orange County, California, and you are very well known. You could have your face on a 20-foot screen on a Sunday morning, but you also can't go anywhere without being noticed at a restaurant or a grocery store, and people see you, and you don't just get to live by a first name, but you have this title that comes with it as pastor first name. And so not only do you have this very public persona that you really always have to watch yourself and make sure that you're always on, but there's also this very lonely spot internally of, I don't know if I feel as motivated. I don't know if I feel as convicted. I have some things internally that I am still trying to work out, whether that is I have doubts about my faith, whether that is I'm struggling in my marriage right now, whether that feels like I am a lousy father to my kids. And so that disparity between this very public life and the expectation of, oh, well, I thought you were a pastor and you had it all together, even though try to disassemble that and to deconstruct that as much as possible, that I'm just a normal human like everybody else. The expectation is still there. And so that part of us that we can't let it out, that we are in the midst of something, that all of our problems, all of our sermon illustrations are things that we had worked out way out there in the past. That was a problem I used to have, but I no longer have. So don't worry. Everything's okay. You can still listen to me on Sunday morning.
This goes beyond imposter syndrome, where anybody in a leadership role might sit there and go like, am I really qualified to be in this job? What this requires then is that you are not fully known, and you cannot be fully connected with anybody who are in the pews out there, because if you were fully known, the admiration factor could be totally blown up. Is that a little bit of the syndrome that chases some pastors?
Yeah, and I would say that I struggled for a long, long time as a teaching pastor, a larger church, and I would but it was absolutely true, is that on the mornings that I would preach, it even started like the week before. I was asked my wife, I was a little bit of a bear to deal with, but that anxiety of coming to preach, and not, it wasn't an anxiety about I hope I got the theology right. It was this. I used to always say that the longest walk was from the stage to back to the front row after I was done speaking, because there was this, and I realized this is much an issue for me as it is what was put on me. But uh, when I would finish and say Amen, as I would walk back down to my seat, what I was feeling internally was, do you still like me? Was that good enough? Are you going to receive me the same? And that insecurity of walking back to the front row, or what's going to be the buzz around this in the lobby afterwards. It's a very intimidating, and it's a very anxiety filled. And so when I used to say, like, I would be in the fetal position on my couch in my office on Sunday morning, just kind of dreading it and praying that Jesus would come back somehow before I got to do my first service. It was partially a joke, but it was partially like, this is this is very scary, because you're putting yourself out there on the line.
There's a saying in the arena of leadership circles that the command chair is the loneliest chair in the world, right? In this case, what you're setting up is this dynamic that, first of all, we recruit people into the pulpit as teaching pastors. And of course, the human dynamic is very complex, and you can't generalize anything, but there tends to be sort of two vectors. One vector is you think about pastors who have I don't care what you think, I don't care how you feel, I'm telling you how this is going to work, I'm in control, I'm in charge, God's appointed me, we're going to do that. And they sort of bulldoze their way along. And the other personality, who also feels called by Christ, is this one about, if you only really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And someday somebody's going to figure this out. My family already has figured this out. They've already discovered me, right? If you could counsel you 15 years ago, what would you say to you?
Uh, there were parts of this that were already being fed into me, but I needed to pay better attention. And we actually had a phrase amongst the teaching staff at our church, and thankfully it wasn't me, 50 Sundays a year. It was broken up, but we used to have a little bit of a saying, and I wish I took it to heart instead of just kind of laughed it off a little bit more. But after we would preach, we would say to each other, "Way to poop." And it it came from this idea that when you're a toddler and you're learning your potty training, you'd sit on the little toilet on the ground and you'd do it, and the kid stands up and looks and says, "Oh, look what I did." And we, as parents, it's this joyous thing, because we're finally looking at a life of freedom of not having to change diapers anymore. And what we tried to do is just to keep ourselves off of this temptation to have it be about us. And that reminder was there for me all throughout. But it's really hard to internalize that. And really, I break it down into this framework that's been very helpful for me. If you asked me 10 years ago, um, identity, assignment, and calling. For
Mm.
me, if you asked me 10 years ago, tell me about yourself, I would say two things. Number one, I am a pastor. And what that meant was that is my identity. And also that was my calling. And what I realized on the other, coming out of full-time vocational ministry, is that really it was truly an assignment for me, that God had me in a certain place. And what we've learned is that the average male will have 11.4 different assignments or jobs over the course of their life. But really, that we have to get straight. And it took me a lot of time and prayer to be able to get my identity back into this idea that I am the beloved child of God. And really to get that centered and to get those things straight. This is not about you. And so I have a lot more freedom now when I speak in lots of other places. I don't have the same anxiety. I'm not hung up on, and I don't finish and say amen and then walk out of the room and wonder if they still like me, it matters less. And trying to get my head around that now, I don't know if I could have actually done that unless I had gone through the experience that I went through.
So God may have a calling for you, Matt, but we on the church side, we've got metrics for you. What kind of pressure points do we put on you as a pastor?
Yeah, those Monday morning meetings of did you speak within the time frame that was allotted, or were you 5 minutes over? Let's get the financial report of how did the offering come in, and is that going to make it? We need to the roof and the HVAC on in the church is going out, so you're not just a theologian, but now you're also a fundraiser. And how do we actually make sure that we do that? We have to manage people's relationships on staff, and not only the people on staff, but the people who are part of the church. So it really is this entire operation, and the expectation is that you are going to be good at all of it. You're going to be a lead business person. You're going to be a therapist and relationship expert. You're going to bring people together. You're going to be a motivator. You're also going to be a servant. You're going to be an orator with a golden tongue, and all of those expectations. Some of us are up for that, but it is a hamster wheel that is really hard to get off of.
What's the mission of that particular type of church? What if you had a mission statement, what would it be?
Well, we do have mission statements, and the mission statements are almost impossible. We will be all things to all people,
Hmm.
and at the same time, we have a payroll to keep up, and we have a lot of people and mouths to feed, and so we want to keep this organization afloat. And I do think that within the American church that we've lost the plot. Essentially, is how do we actually go out there and make disciples? I think, and I was part of a larger church, so the beauty of a larger church is that there is potential for really great impact. We can make a difference in cities and other churches, and we can send out disciple teams and missions teams. Um, but the race that we have to run to be able to keep that up, we miss out on the expectation is this is your job, 50, 60 hours a week. You tend to your soul on your day off. And we don't have this way of being with Jesus. We are not necessarily prioritizing. I could not sit in the movie theater and just enjoy a date night with my wife because I'm trying to think about actually get a clip out of this for the message that's coming up. So to really be able to separate and say, uh, live in this all the time, there's just an expectation that, and a lot of it, unfortunately, I think is self-imposed. But it is this thing that we have created. It's this machine that needs to be fed. And what really needs to be fed in all of this is our souls and our relationships with Jesus.
So one of the things that I notice in a lot of organizations that I'm involved with, and this is as true in not for profit as it is for profit, is that the mission of the organization is to be a successful institution as opposed to the focal point of whatever that organization was originated to do. So am I hearing you in this, Matt, that essentially the mission was make the organization successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we keep the organization going? We have to keep it going, and the pressure for all of that to continue so that the school could stay open, so that we didn't have the shame of having to sell something off, or we need to start renting out parts of the property. There is we have to keep the organization afloat, right? If we don't have our 80 to $100,000 a week, then how are we going to actually, make the budget and keep all of this? And so that is the pressure. And then how do we actually design services and design an experience? And now reading teams, which is really kind of your welcoming crew. And so there are all of these pieces that really have to be in place. And there is just a part of me, like you hear guys like Francis Chan that just say, I just want to, if we could actually just put me on an island, let me read the New Testament again and start from scratch, would it look anything like this? Um, you kind of just wish that you had a little bit more of the faith of the underground church in some kind of persecuted country, because that feels a little bit more real than that we've made it out to be.
The leadership teams who were sort of the governance of the church or churches that you've been a part of, what did they tend to focus on with you in terms of the direction of the church? What would you say are one or two things that float to the top of your mind as this was really their agenda? This is where their heart, soul, and ethos was as we got together as leadership teams.
The word that is hitting me right now is efficiency. Um, and I look back and there are things that I wish that we had done differently, or even just how we did things. We would look for inefficiencies, and whether that is taking somebody from their first time visit to, how do we get them to be somebody who's committed, involved in, and through membership. That whole process, you could look at that through the lens of a customer journey, but how do we make every piece of this process efficient? And we can certainly wrap goodwill and gospel around all of this, no doubt. But there is just an expectation, and we have reviews, and how are we going to? It's a tough thing because you want to build up a culture where we are effective, and there has to be an urgency with the mission, right? There has to be, if the king is coming back, and we want to prepare, and we have a generation that we have to reach, then we want to do this well, and we don't want to be sitting around and having coffee and donuts while people are investing and sowing into the church, and we're just like, well, thank you for doing that. We're going to really have some nice quiet times as a staff. You want this to be effective. Uh, do we do that to the detriment of missing what Jesus meant for this to be? And so it has become something. You just often wonder. You look at this: if Jesus showed up and he came to our church on Sunday, number one, he'd probably come on Saturday because that's the Sabbath. But what would he say about all of this, and how does he lead in this modern context? And so it is a stripping away, and how do we actually do that in a way that keeps this thing healthy?
I'm going to put you at the podium. There are 5,000 leaders from the mega churches. It's a wide, beautiful scattering of 5,000 leaders from mega churches all across the US. And they're sitting there, and your job is to say to them, I've seen the kinds of things you can do to pastors. I've watched the wreckage and the rubble and the frustrations and the despairs that have exited the churches. I want to lean in and tell you some things. What would your advice be to these 5,000 leaders in these mega churches?
There's a lot of hurt on the other side of vocational ministry. There are people who are just hanging on. There are people who have given their lives to this, and their families have sacrificed. And we want to honor them just as much on the way out as we did on the way in. And there's a picture that I was just in last week with a group of executive pastors, and I showed them a picture of a group of believers that were coming around a person, laying hands and praying over them. And I asked the question, I said, raise your hand if this picture symbolizes to you bringing somebody in and installing a new pastor in the church? And then I said, how many of you see this picture and you see that this picture is really depicting somebody who is being sent out and transplanted into another part of the kingdom? And almost everybody raised their hand that this was an installation. And what I think is the tragedy in that is that we see these moments of of bringing people in with great fanfare and with great pomp and circumstance. A lot of transparency, a lot of prayer went into this moment. Um, but we don't exit our people well. And I believe how we say goodbye matters. I remember being at a conference 6 months ago, and we had a booth, and there's a big banner behind me that said Pastoral Transitions, and an old man came up to the booth, and he was looking past me. He's reading the banner behind me, and he figures out who we are and what we're doing. And he looked at me and he said, 30 years. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, I led a church and was part of my denomination for 30 years. And I got a note in the mail that said in 2 weeks it was going to be my last Sunday and that they were done. I wasn't going to get moved. I wasn't going to go anywhere else. They were done with me. My time as a pastor with the denomination had ended. And I said, did they honor you on the way out? What was that exit like? And I saw a tear fall from this old man's face, and I saw his jaw to quiver, and he just said, nothing. They did nothing. And then he walked away. And I just thought, how sad is that? And unfortunately, this is the story that we continue to hear far too often at Pastoral Transitions, is that we have abandoned brothers and sisters. And it's what we've called the Uriah effect, that we are all lined up on the front lines and we're going to go after the enemy, and we're going to take ground for the kingdom. And we all say, and we have people who are running out there, and they turn around and they find that they're in the combat zone all by themselves without armor. And they're not only taking fire from the enemy, but it feels like they've just taken fire that's friendly, and it doesn't feel so friendly. We need to do this differently, and we need to be able to walk with people, even if there's moral failure, even if there was poor job performance. Is how do we actually walk with people and love people on their way out? I think it matters.
You you've seen some pretty rough exits in your time with Pastoral Transitions. You've listened to some pretty rough stories. You've also heard stories about a number of pastors who just really didn't need to be in the pulpit anymore. They shouldn't be there. They need to go out the door. I have to imagine you're both trying to help a pastor who's in crisis, as well as a church that's trying to figure out how to get itself out of the crisis of a particular pastor. Is that fair with your ministry?
Yeah, I think we see the gamut. I think that we have people that are coming to us for all kinds of different reasons. We say that some of them are initiated, and it's a hidden desire of their heart, and something that's going on that the Lord is leading them out, and they just say, I'm just done. And there's some of them that they are blindsided. But the stories range, but the practice and the methodology of how we do this really is what has to be different. And so when people are starting to surface this question, it's a very scary thing, and it's done in a lot of secrecy. And we mostly only get emails from people's private email addresses, not their church email address, not their ministry address, right? Just in case. And these are people who are, that sometimes they're executive pastors or senior pastors. I just don't want anybody to know. I don't want this to come through the network just in case our IT guys. But that question of I'm not sure that I want to be doing this in this way anymore, is really what we want to be doing. And so that's where, even our podcast, Life After Ministry, it's asking this question: is there life after ministry, and is it any good? Can I still be used of the Lord, and is there ministry after ministry? Because most of us, when we're called into ministry, I think a lot of us think that this is a lifetime calling, and we're never out. And the truth of the matter is, yes, we are all called into ministry. It's not just for the paid professionals, but uh, how do we listen to the Lord and get His vision for what He wants us to do in our next season of life? Is something that we have to pay attention to. So we're helping discern that, whether that is from a career perspective, vocational discernment, whether there's some blind spots that we have in our own self that maybe led to us not being in that position anymore, or that we just need some healing and counseling and prayer for a season to be able to help us transition out.
Let's talk about your website and some of the services then that I should expect if I reach out to you, either as a church or as a pastor. Give us the website address. We'll put this up on the screen, everybody, so you can see this as Matt's laying it out, and also his podcast, which is Life After Ministry.
Yeah, so pastoraltransitions.com really is the hub for what we consider is transitional ministry. And in the corporate world, in some situations, you'll have something that we call outplacement services. If you're going to let somebody go, you say, hey, you get a couple sessions with a career counselor. And we thought, well, we need to go beyond severance and maybe a couple sessions. And unfortunately, the church doesn't even do that. In many cases, what we're finding, you might get a severance package, but what does it look like for us to go above and beyond in that transition? And so we're looking through the lens of career. When I came out of ministry, I didn't even know what LinkedIn was, let alone have a LinkedIn account. So, and I was in my position for 22 years. So I really started when I was still in school, in my university. I went to Biola. So I really didn't have to create a resume for it. So 22 years later in ministry, I didn't have a resume. So we work with people, we do assessments, and we're trying to where is it that God has given you skill sets, abilities, and passion, as well as your spiritual gifts, and how do we take all of that? Because a lot of people are coming out of ministry saying, well, what do I do with a seminary degree? Should I just go to Home Depot or Starbucks? So we're giving them some pathways to be able to say, here is where, what you don't realize is that some of those communication skills actually have life in other parts in job market. Then we're also looking at 360-degree reviews. Sometimes people, their mouth got them in trouble. Sometimes they didn't have any vision or they didn't have any leadership skills. And so let's take a look and we'll do a 360-degree review. Let's look at life and leadership coaching, and let's to get to some of these next places. We're asking the question, where is God at for you in this season of wilderness as you're moving from what we'd say orientation to disorientation? Is this wilderness to, you can't go back to how it used to be, which is orientation, but it's a reorientation. It's a new normal for you. So let's talk about where the presence of God is for you in this season as you're walking through the wilderness. And then the last piece is counseling. What is it that you need? Whether that is you are a pastor whose spouse has left you and now you're going through a divorce, which is contributing to you not having a position anymore. And maybe you need some help in divorce support and recovery, as well as, or you might have, there may have been an affair. And so now you need marriage counseling, or maybe you're just trying to figure out what's going on. I remember my kid, one of my kids, we let them know that I'm not going to be a pastor anymore. He told me, he said, but Dad, I really like being a pastor's kid. And I realized like this is something that is impacting the whole family. We all really needed a lot of help in that season. So we're really just taking people as they come to us and saying, what is it that you need? And then how can we leverage our resources, our relationships, these other ministries that we work with, and what God has given us to show empathy and show support for you in this next season as you're transitioning out. And it really is a generous thing that the church can do. And it's actually helpful for the church to be able to stand up and say, we want to let you know today that there's a transition on our team, that we're letting somebody go. We love them and we care about them. And so we're working with Pastoral Transitions to be able to make sure that their next season is just as promising and hope-filled as ours is for the church. It really changes the narrative for people. They're going to torches that they're ready to, like, we're going to storm the castle and we're going to split and we're going to take off, to, oh, there's really something here that they actually do care. And I don't know all the story of what happened there, but I'm going to at least trust that they do care for that person.
PastoralTransitions.com. Matt Davis, who's also the podcaster on Life After Ministry. Thank you for all the work you do for a lot of deserving pastors and a lot of churches, and thank you for your ministry to Christ as a pastor. Thanks for your service there too as well, and especially for being with us on the Disciple Dilemma.
Thanks for having me.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.